All right. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. In 2020, when nearly all schools in Minnesota had moved to distance learning at the height of the COVID pandemic, experts estimated that the average student lost 7 months of learning due to interruptions. And for low-income students who are less likely to have high-speed internet, that loss was closer to 12 months. So to combat this emerging issue, advocates for digital equity stepped up to the plate to fill the need for internet access and technological equipment like laptops and computers for remote workers, students, and families in need. Many came from low income or immigrant backgrounds. However, it soon became clear that having internet access and supplying hardware and computers wasn't enough. Students and families also needed technical support and training to adapt to and navigate the digital learning environment. Today, at the start of the new school year, we've brought together a panel of community experts who can help us further understand this issue, as well as offer practical solutions and tips for parents, remote workers, and adult learners who are trying to find ways to stay reliably connected online. I will ask to please stay muted during this session and to submit any questions in the chat. And of course, thank you to Comcast for sponsoring this community conversation. And with that, I will go ahead and introduce our panelists for today. So first we have Eric Neschheim. Eric is the former executive director of Literacy Minnesota and is currently the interim managing director of digital strategies for Literacy Minnesota. This new and expanding division of the organization houses North Star Digital Literacy, national partnerships, and digital navigation. He's a member of the Governor's Workforce Development Board, the Steering Committee of Connected Minnesota, the Steering Committee of the Open Door Collective, the Board of the National Coalition for Literacy, and co-chair of the Evidence-Based Adult Education System, which promotes and advocates for more resources and research in the field. Eric has been involved in the literacy field for 32 years and looks forward to a world where life-changing learning is within everyone's reach. We also have Jolanda Poole. Jolanda is Director of STEM Programming at Summit Academy OIC. She plans, develops, and deploys STEM programming for youth pre-K and 12th grade within the Northside STEM District. She was born, raised, and attended school in North Minneapolis, and she recently graduated from the University of Northwestern St. Paul with a degree in business management. Jolanda has a passion for education and has dedicated her entire adult life to the success and well-being of the youth in the Minneapolis community. And we also have Innie Augustine, the founder of Project Nandy. Project Nandy promotes educational equity and improves learning outcomes for Minnesota's Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and Asian students by providing them with access to services and technology in their homes. And lastly, we have Stacy Nelson Kumar, who serves as Director of Community Impact for Comcast in the Twin Cities region, where she's responsible for managing community partnerships and charitable giving in an effort to bridge the digital divide. She focuses a majority of her time on digital equity initiatives such as Internet Essentials and the Affordable Connectivity Program and building relationships within the community. Stacy's career in community relations spans 20 years across several companies, industries, and geographies. She graduated from Washington University in St. Louis with a dual master's degree in social work and business administration and earned her bachelor's degree in psychology from Whitman College in Washington. So thank you to all of our panelists for joining us. Why don't we start with Eric? Let's start with sort of defining the problem here. When we say that there is a digital divide and a digital equity problem, what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for inviting us to have this discussion. This is very exciting that we're finally getting to this. And I do see some familiar faces here, so that's nice. Familiar names, I should say. I don't see your faces. I should also note that, so the area that I come from is a little bit more adult focused, but we sort of look at it as a family affair, right? So a lot of the adult literacy work that we do is more family literacy work. So that's the angle I'm coming at it from, but I will, and also full disclosure, I'm going to give a couple of definitions here of what we believe to be the question, and they're not my made up definitions. They're actually coming from someplace. I'm a member of a group called the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, which has worked with the community in the field to come up with these definitions, and I think they're pretty much spot on. So let's just start with it, and up for debate if people have thoughts or questions. The digital divide is the gap between those who have affordable access, skills, and support to effectively engage online and those who don't. So as you know, technology is constantly evolving. The digital divide prevents equal participation and opportunity in virtually every aspect of life at this point. We'll talk about this more as the hour and a half goes on, but this is something that now is affecting every piece of what everyone does. It disproportionately affects people of color, indigenous peoples, households with low income, people with disabilities, people in rural areas, some youth, and obviously older adults. So digital equity is a condition in which all individuals and communities have the information, technology, capacity needed for full participation in our society, democracy, and economy. So it's necessary for civic and cultural participation, employment, lifelong learning. It's important to note that we use the term equity versus equality. When we use the word equity, we're accurately acknowledging the systemic barriers that need to be dismantled before achieving equality for all. So I guess to state it simply, the digital divide is the problem. Digital equity is the goal. Digital inclusion is the work that we're all trying so hard to do right now.
And why is it taking so long to bridge or narrow the digital divide and get kind of to that goal, as you said, of digital equity? Or do you think it's not taking long at all and we're making great headway?
Leading question, very good question, actually. So as I mentioned, I think the inequities have been constructed into everything, right? And so it shouldn't be a surprise that this is something that we're seeing more and more of. Certain communities have been left out traditionally and continue to be left out, and that's part of a discussion that's going on right now. Corporate greed, part of it, right? Money, where resources flow, racism, everything becomes part of the challenge. So no, we have not been doing very well, and it is taking too long. Part of the issue is the speed at which government and politics work as well. I think that one of the silver linings of the pandemic, I think, and there's not many, but there are some. One of the silver linings is that people maybe are taking note of this as more of a challenge than it was before. I think we were just sort of happily moving along, working on broadband and seeing if we can get broadband for people. And I think it became very, very clear that there is a major problem here. And it's actually, when it starts to affect the economy, then people perk their ears up, right? So now that's where we're at. One of the issues that I think we've run across is, in my field is adult basic education, so that's the main area that I work. We don't consider, like my agency considers digital equity and digital literacy to be part of a literacy definition. The government doesn't. So when we talk about literacy, we include things like being able to use computers, being able to access, information and so on. Our definition of literacy that we get from the federal government that funds all of this, and mainly does fund all of it, does not include digital literacy in that definition, which means that adult basic education programs often don't do that work and can't include somebody who maybe is traditionally literate but doesn't have the digital literacy skills, right? So all of these things make everything harder and makes it a lot slower. I think the silver lining of the pandemic is that I think people are now starting to see that, and I think it's an opportunity for all of us to really jump on and start talking about. Everybody has some connection to somebody who's struggling with digital equity. Everybody. There's not a soul out there that doesn't know somebody who's struggling with this. And that's huge, because that means that nobody's off the hook. Nobody can just like, oh, that's somebody else, right? So I think that's one of the silver linings. It's very difficult to tell who is struggling with this. I tutor, before the pandemic, I tutored for years doing, digital equity tutoring, helping people learn how to use computers. So when somebody walked into the room, you couldn't many people walked in that room would be considered fully literate, but did not have digital literacy skills. And so it's really difficult to tell. And I think that should be something that we note, right?
Could you name some of the long-term impacts of facing consistent barriers around digital equity or digital literacy? For example, maybe a parent doesn't know how to access their child's grades online through like a school's reporting system. What are some of the long-term impacts that people face in those situations?
Sure, yeah, and that's a great example. And I think we need to stop and consider. We for years, this was something that we sort of talked about with literacy, right? What are the things you can't do if you are not literate? Well, the same applies. So what are some of those things that if you don't have digital literacy skills, you cannot do? Well, it turns out it's a lot of things, particularly lately. So almost every healthcare system now has a portal that they expect people to go through, right? So telehealth visits, portals that they're expecting you to use, those all require a fairly high level of digital literacy skills to use. And people are being left behind because of that. Communicating with your children's schools and teachers, obviously, is almost every parent has struggled with that during the last couple of years. Filling out government forms, most of them now are online, right? So you need to figure out how to get on there and figure out how to fill them out. Applying for jobs, many applications now are exclusively online. Accessing other important information that makes life easier, which is now all available online, right? More and more jobs, in fact, probably most jobs have some kind of digital component. So even if you can get the job, you're now supposed to be able to use some kind of technology. So that's what the digital divide is all about. So we know what happens when you can't access healthcare systems, and it's not good. We know what happens when you don't interact with your teacher, right? We know what happens when we know what happens if you can't fill an online form out, or for a job or a financial application. There's growing evidence showing what happened during the pandemic. The digital divide widened. Do I have time for a quick story?
Sure.
Okay.
Quick story, yes.
So I'm gonna give you a quick story from sort of my little world, right? The world of adult basic education. When the pandemic hit, there were programs that were serving students that were preparing for jobs, fairly high level students that had some skills, right? Maybe had their GED, were prepared. The programs had prepared them with devices and skills and so on. Those programs did shut down for the pandemic. Many of them just were able to start right back up because the students had the devices, had the skills, and could start moving with online classes and so on. Right? Other programs, and there are many like this, were serving lower level students that were from underserved populations that didn't have devices, didn't have the skills, didn't have broadband. Those programs weren't able to get students back up and going very quickly. And in fact, are today still struggling. And the way the funding formulas work, the federal funding formulas work, it favors that first program. And so the second program will end up the pandemic with a lot less money. And that's the population that needs this help the most, right? And so that's sort of in a nutshell, what we're dealing with.
So that leads well into my last question with you, Eric. How do we ensure that we're reaching those communities and meeting their connectivity needs? And then how does that also inform your own work?
Yeah, that's great. So this is something that we've identified as part of literacy long ago, and it is part of our legislative work. And for better or for worse, a lot of the resources that are flowing are going to flow from, through governments and so on. There is a lot of resources that have just been approved by Congress as part of the Digital Equity Act that we need to make sure are flowing in the right direction and to the right places. And it's going to take a lot of work to do that. And so an agency like mine is committed to that. I know some of the other agencies here are committed to that as well. It's important that those resources, and there's billions of dollars, go to the right places and end up, serving the right people in the right ways. So that's important. It's important to make sure that we're training staff and programs around these issues. I think you mentioned, Hiba, I think early on, well, I can't remember if you were the one that mentioned it, but I think we need to make sure that digital skills are part of every conversation. So the question, I think you did say this at the beginning, that there's, people are getting devices out, people are having broadband conversations. The skills piece is the piece that's often left out of that conversation. And I think we need to push that part of the conversation every time we have the conversation and make sure that we're mentioning, because I think it's easy to forget that part, right? It's easy to sort of think about, oh, the devices. And I know other people here, are having conversations about broadband, and those are important conversations. My agency also runs a platform called North Star Digital Literacy, which assesses, trains, and supports programs, mostly systems and programs around digital literacy. And I have to say that, years ago when we put that platform online, we sort of thought it was a suggestion from St. Paul Public Library that we do something like that. So we created it, put it online, and within weeks we were getting hits from all over the world. And we've had 6 million assessments worldwide given from our little website, because there's so much need out there. So many people are struggling with this and need those resources. So it's important for us to just keep this conversation going, keep the advocacy out there. And I'm happy to talk to any of you offline about what we're doing and how we can help. But we appreciate this forum. This is a great forum.
So Ini, and please correct me if I am pronouncing your name wrong, but we know that your organization, Project NANDI, serves Minnesota's Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and Asian students. So
Yes.
In an ideal world, what does defeating the digital divide look like for those communities and those students, especially as well as their families?
Thank you. And it's Ini and Project NANDI. So in my opinion, closing the digital divide means that young people in the next generation understand that technology is not something that's just kind of like for this exclusive group of people or something that they could never do, but it's something that they've always done and something that's for them that they know how to use. It would mean that the structural, systemic barriers to digital literacy would be bridged, and children of color would have the same access to internet and to technology that their white peers do. And that's what that would look like.
Thanks, Ini. And how does that relate to how you define impact at Project NANDI?
Well, we tend to take a long-term view of kind of like what the actual barriers are. So for example, right now, I'm working with the Project NANDI families to build a family broadband coalition. And we are working on creating a cooperatively run internet service based on fiber and 5G here in the Twin Cities. And so, part of that solution is believing that the communities impacted have the skills and the resources to create their own solutions. And there isn't a lot of that because part of the systems of oppression are, believing that people of color don't have the skills. Not only do they not have the skills, but they don't deserve the services. You see, so, at the root of the digital divide challenge for a lot of my families was simply accessing internet at an affordable rate. And, because we live in the Twin Cities where there's a virtual monopoly on internet services, that is a direct systemic challenge that impacts communities of color, in an outsized way. So again, getting to the root of the issue and giving the power, the trust, and the funding back to the people who are impacted the most.
Can you describe how your organization's purpose has evolved from the start of the pandemic until now? Were there any unexpected challenges that have emerged in the last couple of years, and how have you kind of dealt with them?
Yeah, most definitely. So, we were actually launched in direct response to George Floyd and COVID-19. And so we were largely just thinking, on our feet. And one of the things that I realized, because I'm a working network engineer, so I work, create and design internet networks for various businesses. And I realized that kind of these specialized concierge services that my corporate clients were using and paying for, those are the same types of services that the low income people in my community needed. They needed somebody to sit down and train them on how to use Zoom, how to get into, Schoology. And, these corporations might pay thousands of dollars, for this type of service, but the people who actually need the service desperately, they're not prioritized in the same way. So, we've been working on finding funding to be able to provide those types of specialized trainings, to communities of color, and also being mindful to make sure that the people serving the people look and sound like the populations that they're serving. And so we've created a lot of partnerships with trade schools, and actually are training interns of color in the industry. So, we're using the program, again, drawing on the skills and resources of the families of color, training those families of color, those kids.
And kind of narrowing in on how this is impacting students, particularly, Jolanda, when it comes to digital connectivity, what are some of the challenges that students of color of all ages have faced throughout the pandemic?
Thank you so much. I believe that the challenge has been that many children have lacked internet service, access to internet, as well as access to devices, and lacking the basic tech skills to navigate school-based learning platforms. That includes Google Meet, Microsoft Teams, Zoom meetings, and other adapted platforms. We also have seen that some teens have struggled with their own insecurities from lack of tech navigation skills, causing social isolation, and just wanting to be alone to refrain from the embarrassment of their lack of digital knowledge. Many parents have lacked the ability to support their children with their homework because of not having the basic digital knowledge. And that's as simple as connecting devices to the internet, initiating and reading emails, logging into the parent portal, like Eric mentioned earlier today. Not only just logging in, but being able to navigate the portal to find students' assignments and communications from teachers to help support their students' learning.
And how does that impact the quality of their education and in turn their ability to, meet their career goals and find jobs in this economy?
All right, we've noticed that many students have fallen behind. They've fallen further behind. Our students in the community, they already were behind the curve, right? And so many schools had struggled just to figure out how to substitute in-school resources for online instruction. Some schools took weeks, even months, to get devices in the hands of students to support their learning, as well as providing hotspots for students to learn because they didn't have internet service within their houses. The quality of education was impacted tremendously because there seemed to be no formal regulation or management of what the teachers were expected to teach the students or what their learning expectation was for our students. I recall so many of my teacher friends stating that they're told by their administrators that as long as they showed up on the Zoom or on the Google Meet, they deserve a grade. And so that's a complete disservice to our kids, considering they're already behind. As mentioned before, parents had to stay home with their kids to ensure that their students would even attend the class. Parents were expected to support their students' learning, and many of our parents lacked an education of their own. parents lack the digital skills necessary to even continue to work when they were placed at home for work, working remotely, as well as navigating applying for jobs, applying for medical and social service assistance and things like that. The pandemic has definitely revealed the digital inequities in our community, and it's a huge problem.
And how has Summit Academy responded to a lot of these challenges that you've outlined?
We developed a tech program called Tech Connects, which I'm really, really fond about. It's a partnership with Comcast. It's a paid internship program that equips our high schoolers in North Minneapolis with tech skills and devices to provide tech support to North Minneapolis and support the advancement of digital equity. We adopted the Northstar digital literacy support to support our tech learning. So thanks, Eric. We currently host a Tech Tuesday at Agape, where every Tuesday from 5 to 7, we have open hours for community people. They can sign up ahead of time or they can just drop in to receive assistance with the following skills. I have a list too. Internet basics, using their email, Word, Microsoft Windows, Mac, Google Docs, basic account setup for email, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Zoom, applying for a library card. Other digital literacy is the support with signing up for Comcast Internet Essentials programming, password management, security tips, software updates for devices, booking COVID test appointments, and also job search support in applying for jobs.
Yeah, these are all really great resources. Do you also have any tips or other recommendations for parents who want to help their children combat some of these challenges? We're going to be doing a write-up of this session as well, so it'll be good to kind of have these resources outlined for our readers too. So any tips or recommendations?
Perfect. Yeah. So I'll say first off, be patient with yourself and your children. We are learning. And of course, we want the best for every child within our community. I would suggest that parents need to be a constant advocate for their children. We've learned that many teachers are exhausted and some may only do the bare minimum to get by in supporting students. So with that, I say parents can call, email, write letters, or just show up at the school to speak with the teachers about their child's education concerns. They can work with the teachers to develop learning plans to ensure that they're moving ahead, not just staying stagnant in their learning, or just being present to show the teachers that they are invested in their child's educational career. I would suggest them to come out to our drop-in sites and receive whatever supports that we have available to help them build on their own digital skills. They can sign up for Internet Essentials, either at our site or just go to the Xfinity website to do that. Also, there are over 10 Best Buy Teen Tech Centers in the Minneapolis and St. Paul area. So that's a drop-in site for teens to build on their tech skills and also get homework help. We personally offer mini STEM studio programming for teens at our Teen Tech Center at Summit Academy to help explore different STEM career fields. So they'll learn about photography. The Tech Connect internship is available 4 times a year for 12 weeks, cybersecurity and 3D and architectural design. Starting in October, our site will be open 6 days a week, Monday through Friday from 3 to 7, and then also on Saturdays from 10 to 3.
Awesome.
Hennepin County, I have a couple more. So Hennepin County also has additional digital support options as well within their library system. So people can go there and sign up for access to get devices for their homes. And then there's also the YMCA, the Boys and Girls Club. And then Beacons has an after school program that helps support kids, and that starts in October. So there you go.
Awesome. So just a reminder that we are going to be posting a write-up on Sahan Journal. So if you missed any of those drop-in details, we will have those details for you. So last but not least, Stacy, how have telecommunication companies typically served families, especially families of color who were struggling to find reliable and affordable ways to stay connected online?
Thank you, Hiba. I think the main the primary way has really been to provide internet, and we know that has not been adequate, right? That has not necessarily reached the families of color who needed it. It hasn't necessarily been delivered in a fast enough way. And so I can speak mostly from the Comcast perspective, and what we've done starting 10 years ago was start a program called Internet Essentials, and that basically is a low-cost in-home internet product that would be available to qualified families for less than $10 a month. That program really started as a way to specifically address educational gaps. It was very much focused on students K through 12 and their families who needed to have internet at home. But since the start of it 10 years ago, it has really expanded, and the eligibility for the program is quite broad now, so that it can serve maybe the elderly, someone who's older that doesn't have children in the school system, for example. So it's based more on the participation in federal benefit programs. So then that makes the family eligible for Internet Essentials to then access that $10 a month internet. The other two components, and I know they've been brought up a little bit already with the conversation we've had, that are also part of Internet Essentials is access to a device. We know that that is a big piece of the digital equity equation, and so that's something that is available through the Internet Essentials program. Communications providers have done the device piece of it, but it was a gap that we saw and wanted to help fill. So for about $150, families who are on Internet Essentials can access a brand new laptop. The other piece is the digital skills training that Eric was talking about. And so just ensuring that we are supporting either with our dollars or with our volunteers, different digital learning programs so that community members who are needing them can access them for free. So the the Internet Essentials program has really been our answer, and like I mentioned, has been in effect for 10 plus years. And so it continues to grow, continues to expand in eligibility, especially as you know, we did see how big the digital divide was when the pandemic started.
So along with the Internet Essentials program, can you give some examples of other programs that exist to support families that people might not know about?
Absolutely, and I think some have been mentioned in the call, so I appreciate my colleagues mentioning, you know, their specific programs. There are two that I'll highlight specifically. One is the Affordable Connectivity Program, and that is a program that we find does not have the awareness, but it is absolutely a benefit for families to help cover the cost of internet. So Eni mentioned cost, and that is one of the most significant barriers we always hear about for internet at home. The Affordable Connectivity Program basically provides a qualified family, so there is an income qualification of 200% of poverty or less. Qualified families can get $30 a month to pay for their connectivity costs, and that can cover internet and mobile. So there's an opportunity right there to access internet service for $30. So in the case of Internet Essentials, it makes it free. That $10 a month is covered by that $30 credit. There's $20 left if there's an interest in having mobile services as well, or we have a higher speed product that is $30, and the Affordable Connectivity Program covers the entire cost. So that program in itself really does address one of the primary barriers. It's important to note that that program is not just a Comcast program. That's part of the federal stimulus funding that has come as a result of the pandemic. And so it's a program to help families be connected, whatever provider they want to have. It doesn't have to be just Comcast. It's just not very well known about. It launched January 1st. It had a couple of iterations, last year and the year before. But it is really that, a key way to take the cost conversation, take the cost barrier off the table. The other program, and I was excited to hear Eni mention this as well, and this is exactly how we've been partnering with Summit and Jolanda, is there's this fourth piece of the digital equity equation that doesn't necessarily get talked about, but it gets done, and it's been done sort of in informal ways, and that's digital navigation. And so we know that traditionally we've talked about, services needed, devices are needed, training is needed, but to Eni's point, there's also needed that person who can stop and provide the one-on-one help to a family to say, let us help you, let us show you how to set that password to get into your child's school system. Let us show you how to access that job application that's online. It's really, or let us show you how to set up your computer. Like, this is where the things plug in. This is how this works. This is how you can, utilize the mouse to get to the places you want to go. I mean, there's such a spectrum of digital literacy skills within families. We just want to make sure that there's the services there to meet them where they are. So I think that's the other resource that people may not realize is out there, is that a lot of programs, I know that Hennepin County is one, and then as we've learned from our partners here on the call, that digital navigation is available, and I think it's growing because it has been identified as that need to really help bridge that that more intimate way of helping bridge the gap with the meeting the family with exactly the resources they need. So the digital navigation piece is another thing I think is important for families to know about, that it's out there, it exists. It's maybe not as easy to find, but we're doing our best and our part to help stand up those programs and support them financially so that they can continue to expand and serve the needs of the families in the Twin Cities.
So once again, thank you to Comcast for sponsoring this community conversation, and also a huge thank you to our panelists and our attendees. If any of our attendees do have any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat. Otherwise, had a lively discussion today. A recording of the event will also be available. But if we don't have any other questions from attendees, I have a question. And any of the panelists can feel free to just jump in, but in an ideal world, what does digital equity look like? And would you say we're on track to eventually getting to that point?
I'll jump in basing my response on Eric's, original sharing of the definition, right? That that really there are no barriers to families, adults, children, at any age, person in a family accessing what they need to. So, whatever that is, and as we know, it's so much now on the internet, that is really a critical component to life, and so that there are no barriers to that. So to the question of whether we're on track, I mean, we're making very slow progress, and I think Eric brought up a couple of points, and the one I would draw on is, now that this issue has attention, there are significant funds being put into communities, but to Eni's point, are they being put into the communities where they're most needed? And are those decisions being made by the people who need them the most? And so I worry a little bit that we are, we're sort of focused on so much of the funding that and maybe there's pressure to get it spent, that we're not necessarily doing it in a thoughtful way. And so on track, I think, to some degree, now that there's funding, but we have a lot more work to do to just make sure that the funding actually makes the difference we want it to make.
I would also like to add that I feel like we are not on track to digital equity, because again, my definition means that, these children that are shut out from, internet and computers, they've grown up, but they are also like working in technology and contributing to the economy and paying bills and achieving, economic stability. within those industries. There are businesses creating new technologies that are run by, you know, these families and people of color. So it's really taking the long-term view and making sure that people of color and the communities that are impacted by the digital divide are a part of the industry at every single level.
I would tend to agree a bit that we're not on track, but I also think that right now it's up to us to try and get it on track. You know, there is a lot of resources, and I do think, I mean, it's urgent, honestly. So they dumped a bunch of money, and we've seen it before, right? Where a bunch of money is dumped on some cause, and it just, who knows, right? So I do think that over the next few years, it's really urgent that people hear this. People hear these messages. You know, when I say people who are making decisions, hear some of these messages. And like I said, you know, public awareness and outreach is super important right now, because we need everybody saying these things. We need people saying these things. You know, there can be optimism here.
Any other final thoughts that our panelists would like to share before we wrap up?
I'd like to say I used the word optimism as one of the last words that were used. So hopefully that's something, I don't know.
I would say that we are having a Black Broadband Summit November 17th at the Urban League. We're going to come together as a community and talk about how the internet works, you know, how lack of internet impacts our communities, what it shows up like, things that we want to learn, and just, you know, sharing our experiences around the use of technology and internet. And that's more information is at blackbroadbandsummit.com.
Thank you, Eni.
There is a reason to be optimistic, and I think this conversation is a great resources that are out there, so that other, you know, attendees are now aware and can share those, you know, share those with additional networks, with your schools and within your churches. I mean, just to continue to build that awareness about the resources that are available. I think that that's a positive opportunity for us to continue to move forward.
I'm seeing a question in the chat. Do any of the panelists have thoughts about language barriers and how that plays a role in the digital divide?
Yes, I do. About 30% of the population that we serve is Latinx, and many of them are not English as a first, you know, English is not their first language. And so part of that challenge has been finding staff that represent those communities. So I have a staff member that speaks Amharic, which is a Ethiopian language, and I have a staff member that speaks Hmong. And so again, the people that are carrying the message look and sound like the people being served, and just the simple presence of that person starts kind of a domino effect, and people understanding, hey, this person has the same background as me. If they can, you know, figure it out, maybe I can too.
Yeah.
I think language. Oh, sorry, Jelena, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I echo exactly what Indy just said. We've been in the search for people to help with translation and things like that, or building relationships with other community partners to come in and volunteer to help support our work when it comes to the language barriers as well.
And bringing up the conversation about language barriers, I mean, we haven't really even had the disability conversation. As far as, you know, we had students that needed assistive devices just to use computers, whether that's, you know, extra large text on their screens, or extra large, extra loud headsets for them, or, you know, I mean, there's any number of technology that we can use to make sure that everyone has access to the internet. And we have not, you know, scratched the surface of what we can do for that population.
I agree. I mean, I think keeping in mind the opportunity for equity is very broad, right? It needs to address so many areas. It's not just one, whether it's racial or income or language, like it needs to be across so many different spectrums. I would just say with the language barriers, you know, I mentioned before that cost was one of the primary barriers that we knew about earlier, and language is right up there as well. It's one of the most significant barriers we hear about. We got a lot of work to do on that. I know that at least for the Internet Essentials materials that we have, we can provide those in 33 languages. Now, we don't have staff members that can speak all of 33 languages to be able to then to kind of serve as a navigator or to help in that way. And so that's still an opportunity. But we also know that, you know, a good example I'd say is the Affordable Connectivity Program, that application in itself is only available in English and Spanish. And so just as a society, we've got a lot of work to do. But language, you know, there are programs like the Internet Essentials materials that can be accessed in several different languages. We're happy to provide those to organizations that are serving families with those needs.
Yeah, and just as a, you know, as a representative of the literacy community, obviously it adds another barrier, adds an extra level of difficulty to somebody who's struggling. And I do know, you know, in the programs that we work with, during the pandemic, we lost a lot of the second language learners for various reasons, for lots of different reasons. And it was much more difficult to communicate with them during that period of time. And so I think some ground was lost there because of that. And I know that, you know, there's some good conversations going on about how to make sure that things, you know, for example, our digital literacy assessment is now going to be in Spanish because that's been a huge request. And that's, you know, obviously something that would be helpful, you know, and again, you know, it's all about speed and time and money, you know, but I do think it's a huge barrier.
Okay, I think that wraps up questions from our attendees. Thank you so much for joining us today. And yeah, keep an eye out in your emails and on sahanjournal.com for the recording of this event. And thank you to our panelists as well.
Yeah, nice to meet all you guys.
Thank you so much for having
Thank you.
me.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you as well.